This is Nancy Liu. Nancy Liu went missing from Toronto. She was 15 years old. The last time we see Nancy Liu is on a security camera. She's smiling at someone out in the parking lot. She runs out the door and she vanishes. That was in 1998. This is Lois Hannah. Lois Hannah was at a community dance in her small town. She was having a great time with her family and friends. She said goodbye. She went home. The next day, she didn't arrive at work. Lois was very responsible. So right away, her friends knew something was wrong, and they rushed to her house, and they saw the makings of Lois getting ready for bed. There was a half-drunk cup of tea on the table, and her nightgown was missing. Lois was 21 and has never been seen again. This is Lisa Mass. Lisa Mass was 5 months pregnant when she went missing. She was at a party with friends. She left with a male companion and disappeared. The next day, they found her car on a side road and all her belongings strewn a few fields away. Lisa Mass has never been seen again. I've been painting missing women from Ontario from 1970 to 2000 for the past 4 years. I want to tell you today why I started on this journey and all the things about violence against women that I learned while I was doing it. In order for you to understand why I would embark on such a project, I need to describe to you the way that I think about art. I think everyone has a different definition of what art can be. For me, art is a way to initiate discussion. I want people to talk about the things that we don't talk about. I want to take what's invisible and make it visible. And I want people to start to ask questions about the world around them. So for me to get you to where I was, I want to talk about the world around me when I decided I wanted to paint about violence against women. This is a photograph of my friends and I in university. We all lived in the same house. We had a great time. I'm sure many of you have a picture like this in your photo albums or in your Facebook profile. We're just getting ready to go out. But when I look back at this photo, I feel very sad because I know that by the time we graduated, 3 of the women had been sexually assaulted, and 1 had almost been murdered by her boyfriend. For me, that injustice and that equality was something that I had to focus my art on, but I didn't know how to do it. As a feminist who looks at the world through that lens, I know that there are pictures or images of violence against women everywhere in our pop culture. You can go to the movie theater, you can watch a horror movie, you can see women dismembered and murdered in admirative ways. You can turn on the television and you can see a woman's dead body being used as a hook for a crime show. Now you can open a fashion magazine and you can see domestic violence being used as a cool factor to sell products. So as an image maker, I didn't want to add more images to this litany of violence against women that we were already seeing everywhere. So I hit a kind of creative roadblock. And I had the idea in the back of my mind for many, many years, maybe about 5 years. And I kept going back to it and going back to it. And I just thought, how can I do this without, really communicate about violence against women and how I was feeling without creating a horrific image or re-violating the woman's image. So one day I was in my studio. This is my studio, kind of chaotic. And I was listening to talk radio. This is what I do when I'm painting. And this news report came on the CBC, and they were reporting about statistics around violence against women in Canada. And this statistic came across the news. Half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence by the age of 17. Half of all women in Canada. This statistic completely shocked me to my core, and it re-motivated me to go back to this issue of violence against women. When I heard it, I just stopped and I was thinking about 2 things. One, what does that mean that half of the women in Canada by the age of 17 have already experienced trauma and are already feeling unsafe in our community? What does that mean to our psyche and to our collective ability to succeed? What does that mean? The second thing I was thinking about is that we never talk about it. We're really, really, really good at talking about what's happening across the world. We have a very Eurocentric finger pointing. I can open the newspaper at any day of the week I can look through my newsfeed, and I can read phenomenal essays about the misogyny in India, the violence against women in Pakistan. Look at how the people in Saudi Arabia treat their women. But we don't talk about what's happening here in our community, in our town, in our province. So I knew if I was going to approach this subject, it had to be very local, and it had to get people talking about what's happening right here in our backyard. So in my research, I ended up here. This is the Missing Persons and Unidentified Bodies unit of the OPP. I was really, really surprised that you can go into this website, you can look at unidentified bodies, photographs, you can click on missing people, going back to the 1920s up until now. You can read about the circumstances of their death, find out what they were wearing when they went missing, and read about the case. When I saw these photographs of the missing women, I was so inspired. These were the photos that the families gave. They were the wedding photograph, the graduation photograph, when this woman was in the prime of her life. And I thought, I could paint this, and I could monumentalize the woman instead of sensationalizing the violence that had occurred to them. So I embarked on this 4-year project, and my idea, I had 2 kind of goals or missions behind it. One, I could bring attention to these cases that some of them I'd never heard of. And 2, I could create that discussion about violence against women in our local communities. So I began the research, and it was during this research that I discovered the most horrible things about violence against women. And I want to talk about the 3 things. I learned a lot, but I want to talk about the 3 things that I think are the most important for people to know. The first thing I discovered is that some women are valued more than others. This became apparent very quickly as soon as I started Googling, as soon as I started putting the women's names into the newspaper databases. Some women had thousands, like literally 2,000 newspaper articles, and other women had nothing, like 0. And very quickly, a kind of hierarchy became visible. At the top of that hierarchy are white women who are middle class. They live some kind of pure lifestyle. They're virginal or they're married. These women had thousands upon thousands of articles written about them. Below that, if you were young, white, and beautiful, and you disappeared in a dramatic way, you had hundreds and hundreds of articles written about you. Following that, if you were a person who lived a non-traditional lifestyle, you had fewer articles written about you. And what I mean by non-traditional is if you dated a lot, if you lived on your own, if you traveled, you had very few articles written about you. And this goes for police presence as well. There was less police presence on the cases as I go down the hierarchy. Below that, if you were marginalized, a sex worker, mentally ill, addicted, runaway, 0 articles or few articles. And below that, women of color and Aboriginal women. Nothing. Nothing. So I started searching for women of color and Aboriginal women because I couldn't find any in the databases or in the newspapers. And I came across the idea that there are missing women from the database of missing women. So I went into the national databases, I went into the volunteer databases, I went everywhere and couldn't find women of color or Aboriginal women. So they're undocumented, and this is a huge issue. But I want to talk about 2 organizations that are doing phenomenal work in this area, and I feel really positive because of them. The first group is Sisters in Spirit. I'm sure you've heard of them. They were doing great work lobbying the government and trying to get attention to the fact that there are over 600 known cases of missing or murdered Aboriginal women in Canada. Over 600. This human rights crisis is so horrific that the United Nations and Amnesty International have demanded that the Canadian government do something about it, but they've refused. The other group that I came across is this one, and this is an American organization called Black and Missing But Not Forgotten. So this organization knows very well about that hierarchy that I told you about. They know that their people are not being broadcast, and they need to do it themselves. So they've organized under this website and all the social media platforms, and they use their own media to let the community know about their missing people. If there's one thing I can say today is that Canada desperately needs an organization like this, a sister organization, because I can't find any missing women of color anywhere. So the third thing I want to talk about is that I learned very quickly that it's who you know. When I started really investigating the cases, the families knew who made these women disappear. The police knew who made these women disappear. Some of the journalists I spoke to said, we know who made her disappear. And it was always someone that they knew. But the problem was that without a body, they couldn't convict this person. And that was another thing. Without a body in Ontario, there's never been a conviction of a murder. So what I was thinking about is, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I had this vision of this dark boogeyman that was kind of lurking in the alley. And this person was going to jump out and grab me, and this is how I was going to be sexually assaulted, right? And everything around me reinforced that fact. I was told, don't walk at night alone, and make sure you have a friend. And I was told, carry a rape whistle and take this self-defense class. And we do all those things. But in reality, that kind of attack is extremely rare, extremely rare. The boogeyman is a person. It's someone that you know. It's someone that lives in your neighborhood. It's someone that you work with. And it's probably someone who lives in your house. And I think that we do our young women a huge disservice by perpetuating this myth of the boogeyman. And just to illustrate, on average, every 6 days, a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner. Every 6 days. The number one cause of injury to women in Canada is domestic violence. This is from the Canadian Association of Family of Physicians. The number one cause of injury is domestic violence. So in March of this year for International Women's Day, I had the first big exhibition of the Missing Women Project. And I was so happy and pleased that the art did what I hoped it would. It got that discussion going. There were so many articles written about the exhibition. I got to speak, in the media so many times. And the journalists were so sensitive, and they wrote beautiful pieces about all the things I'm talking about right now. So I was very, very happy. But because of the type of person I am, I want to know what happens next. I want the exhibit to travel, and I want to continue the awareness, but I believe that an action needs to happen next. And so I've been thinking about what a solution would be. What could be a blue sky kind of solution to stop the violence against women? So it's one thing that we have the discussion, but then what can we do to really stop it? And in order to get you to my blue sky solution, I just want to talk about another anecdote. I had a friend who was in a very abusive marriage for about 10 years, and it was one of those typical stories where he had isolated her. We didn't hear from her that often. Nobody knew what was happening, and she finally had the courage to leave. He had been beating her for years. He had sexually assaulted her, and he had attacked the children. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back. She finally left after he started attacking the children. And she said, I went to the local women's shelter, and I just wanted to be around other women. I wanted to just get it out and talk to people, and I wanted to somehow heal myself so that I wouldn't fall into this kind of relationship again. And she said when she walked in the door of the shelter, there was one of these little tables with all the brochures on the table. And she picked up the brochure, and it said, these are the top 10 signs that your partner could become abusive. And she said, Eileen, I looked at this list, and I read through each one, and Bob did every single one in high school, when we were high school sweethearts. And she's like, I was a smart teenager. If someone had told me those top 10 things, I would have seen them as red flags. I wouldn't have married him. Why am I getting this at the end of the journey instead of at the beginning? And it was like a light bulb went over both of our heads, and we started talking about the fact that we do so much to keep our young people safe. We teach them road safety when they're kids. We teach them not to talk to strangers. We teach our adolescents to avoid STIs. We teach them not to drink and drive and don't do those drugs, they're bad for you. But the #1 cause of injury to women in Canada is violence, and we don't talk about it. So if we want to really keep our communities safe and healthy, why don't we teach what is a healthy relationship? What is a non-healthy relationship? So that young girls, when they have those behaviors coming at them, like surveying their text messages, telling them what to wear, they will know that that's a red flag because they learned in school. And they'll know that that's not healthy, and they'll know not to continue the relationship. So my blue sky solution would be that I have faith that education can change things. That if we could create a wonderful education curriculum package where young people could talk about all these issues, Socratic discussion, videos, group work, presentations, where they could have deep learning, and we could talk about those notions of healthy and non-healthy, that we could stop this flow of violence. And I think that's something that we can invent here. So I want to end off with saying that I believe that if we face all these truths about violence against women, the first truth being that gender roles still affect how we value women, that systemic racism still affects how we interpret crimes against women, that we are really perpetrating crimes against each other in our intimate relationships. If we can face those truths, if we can discuss them, and if we can think of an action, we can stop this flow. And that's something I hope you guys will take with you and that you will work on to invent your own idea and go forward and cure the violence that's happening here. Thank you.